Hello and welcome to today's webinar, the top 10 tips for securing your FTP or SFTP server. My name is Bob Libby and I'm the Chief Architect for Linoma Software. I've been in IT for 30 years and have spent the last decade in designing encryption and file transfer solutions. As a certified information security professional, I also consult with organizations on how to best protect their sensitive data assets and achieve regulatory compliance. I'm joined by Steve Libby, who serves as our Director of Engineering, with expertise in developing managed file transfer and encryption solutions on a wide range of platforms including Windows, Linux, and IBM i. Steve leads our GoAnywhere product development team, which is located here in Nebraska. During the webinar, Steve will be helping to address any specific technical questions you may have on this content. Also joining us is Dan Freeman, who is a Senior Solutions Consultant here at Linoma. Dan has spent the last 10 years of his career in various security roles ranging from systems engineer to security officer. And as a CISSP, Dan has designed network systems and procedures to ensure regulatory compliance using the NIST risk management framework and HIPAA standards. So we're going to have a brief introduction to our company, after which our agenda will start by looking at the three main tenets of information security, which should be applied to the storage of movement of any confidential data. Dan will give a summary of the main regulations that govern data security in both the U.S. and Europe. He will also discuss PCI DSS, which is a security standard used throughout the world to protect cardholder data. We will make references to specific sections of the PCI standard throughout this webinar. I will then discuss the typical issues often found in FTP or SFTP servers, which can make them vulnerable to attacks and ineffective. This will create a great lead-in to our main topic of how to best secure your FTP or SFTP server, which we broke into 10 tips or sections. By the end of these tips, you should hopefully have gained some great ideas on what needs to be done to get your FTP or SFTP server in compliance and keep your auditors happy. We'll also share a few additional slides on things to consider to have the most effective environment for your FTP or SFTP services. Then there should be a few minutes to discuss our GoAnywhere MFT solution, which contains an enterprise-grade SFTP and FTPS server. Again, feel free to ask any questions along the way in the control panel, and either Steve or Dan will address them as they have time. So just a quick background on our company. Linoma Software is based in Nebraska and has been in business for over 20 years. We've made Inc. 5000 list as one of the fastest growing private companies for the last 4 years in a row. And we have a very active research and development group which focuses on developing managed file transfer and security products for commercial and government users. Linoma is a division of Help Systems which has over 500 employees and 10,000 customers around the world. And as a member of the PCI Security Council, we keep up to date with the latest standards and ensure our products stay compliant. Dan, I'm going to give you the microphone and let you cover the next couple slides on information security, and then have you give us an overview of the main regulations that cover this topic. Dan?
All right, thanks, Bob. When talking about information security, we tend to gravitate to the CIA. And no, I'm not talking about the intelligence agency, but rather the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. These three tenets act as a reference to guide policies and procedures for an overall comprehensive information security program. Confidentiality is our information access control, whether providing end-user training to help prevent sensitive information from reaching the wrong hands, or adding technical controls such as encryption and hashing to keep user credentials safe. The goal here is to prevent unauthorized access while at the same time providing access for those who do need it. Integrity is ensuring the accuracy of data throughout its entire life cycle, basically checking to make sure that no unauthorized changes are being made to the data from its original state. Having secure and reliable backups, in-transit checksums, version control, and file auditing softwares are all ways to help prevent and ensure that we keep the integrity of our information. And finally, availability is making sure the data is available to all authorized users. Rigorous maintenance of all hardware and infrastructure, high availability systems through clustering and other distributed models, having and testing emergency disaster recovery solutions, as well as ensuring appropriate resources to prevent bottlenecks, are all ways to ensure and protect the availability of our data. Making sure that we are practicing due diligence on data protection across the three aforementioned CIA tenets will help ensure a good foundation for an information security program. One of the ways that we do measure our due diligence is by self-assessments and sometimes third-party audits of our systems. In the next couple of slides, we will introduce some of the major regulations driven by industry, government acts, directives, and sometimes even law. Introduced in 1996, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act requires the Health and Human Services Department to develop regulations protecting the privacy and security of individually identifiable health information or protected health information, PHI. These regulations are designed to protect the CIA of electronic PHI through administrative, physical, and technical safeguards. Penalties, depending on the type of and cause of noncompliance, may warrant a fine of $100,000 to up to $50,000 for each violation. Furthermore, if willful neglect is determined the cause, criminal charges can apply. Next up, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, or GLBA, requires financial institutions to implement safeguards to protect the CIA of customer information. The FDIC requires that each institution implement a comprehensive written information security program that includes administrative, technical, and physical safeguards. Penalties for noncompliance can include a company fine of $100,000 for each violation. Additionally, individual directors and officers can be fined up to $10,000 for each violation. And again, depending on the cause of violation, criminal charges can include imprisonment up to 5 years, a fine, or both. In the United States, privacy laws, there's 47 states that have enacted legislation requiring private or government entities to notify individuals of security breaches when involving personally identifiable information, or PII. This can introduce a lot of administrative overhead and strain on your incident response team. Having said that, in some states, any lost or stolen data that was properly encrypted at rest and in transit can grant your organization exemption from the notification process and, more importantly, avoid potential fines and negative impact on your reputation. Key point, encrypt your data. And lastly, the Federal Information Security Management Act of 2002, which requires each federal agency to develop, document, and implement an agency-wide security program to protect federal information and the supporting information systems. As a key element to FISMA, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, was called upon to develop a risk management framework approach that laid out security and privacy standards to promote comprehensive risk-based security programs. The payment card industry data security standards were developed for those companies responsible for processing debit and credit card payments. Standards require organizations to protect the privacy of customer account data. Like most regulations we've talked about, failure to meet these standards can result in fines or even the termination of the ability to conduct work. In fact, the consequences of not being compliant range from $5,000 to $500,000 levied by the banks and credit card institutions. The latest version, 3.2, had a couple of changes of note. One was the mandatory use of multi-factor authentication when accessing systems with administrative function. And another was implementing a top-down approach from senior management to be involved with and enforce the creation of the security program, which is essential for user and company adoption. Although PCI DSS was designed for the financial industry, its 12 detailed security areas consist of over 200 controls and tests that provide for a comprehensive approach to developing an organizational-wide security program regardless of the industry. And many of the tips in this presentation will reference specific PCI controls. And lastly, the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, is set to replace the current Data Protection Directive as designed to consolidate data privacy laws within Europe, protect EU citizens' privacy through data protection, and to empower them as stewards of their own personal information. This regulation is set to go live May 25th, 2018, and does not only include those companies based in the EU, but extends to all foreign companies doing business involving EU residents' personal information, including U.S.-based companies. Some of the highlights include required data breach notification to a supervisor authority within 72 hours of breach, the mandatory hiring of a data protection officer, and RTBF, or the right to be forgotten, and data portability requests upon each citizen. Non-compliance of GDPR regulations can render up to 20 million euros or 4% of annual global revenue, whichever is greater. So nothing to scoff at. Having said this, experts do believe that the #1 challenge of the GDPR is the applicability to non-EU companies. We guess we'll have to wait and find out how that shakes out. These are just a few of the reasons why we must ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our data. Let's keep this in mind as we cover the top 10 ways to secure your FTP and SFTP servers as one avenue for data protection. Bob?
All right, Dan, well, thanks a lot. Well, there's some pretty scary things that you had mentioned there, some pretty hefty fines that companies have to face if they are in non-compliance. I would like to do a short poll just to see what compliance requirements are presenting the biggest challenge for your file transfers. So if you could respond to the poll, we'll just give you a few seconds and then we'll publish a summary of those results. Don't worry, your identity will not be published. We're just getting a quick summary of what compliance requirements you're facing with. So we'll go ahead and give you a couple more seconds here. All right, very good. So I'm going to go ahead and share those results with you. It looks like 55% of the companies on the line are having to deal with HIPAA requirements, while just under 50% are dealing with PCI, and then kind of scattered amongst other PCI or compliance requirements. So thanks for sharing that with us today. So that's going to take us into our main topic. We're going to kind of start off with talking about some of the main issues that companies are having with their FTP servers today. First of all, a lot of organizations are running older FTP software that's not been kept up to date with the latest security requirements. They may be running free open source software or a legacy commercial product that's not been updated or patched in recent months or even years. And this could be due to letting the vendor maintenance fall behind or simply not spending the time needed to keep the software up to date. As some say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, unfortunately, the organization may wait until they get a bad report from an auditor, or worse yet, experience a breach before they finally decide it's time to upgrade their FTP server. Another issue is misconfigured FTP servers can also introduce some security issues in your environment. When you have a lot of different administrators working on that server over a period of several years, there are bound to be opportunities for human error. For instance, an administrator may have accidentally granted access folder rights to a trading partner, or maybe they created a partner with a weak password that could be vulnerable to a dictionary attack. They have also may have left unneeded services or ports open on that system that could create a pathway to a would-be attacker. Coming up next is
Hey, Bob,
a lot of organizations. Yes.
Bob, real quick, sorry. It looks like we still have the poll up on the screen and not the slides.
Oh, interesting.
There we go.
Okay, sorry, pushed the wrong button. Organizations often also have too many organizations on their FTP servers with elevated rights. Without role-based controls and proper training, these administrators can essentially change almost any setting on that server without realizing the potential security exposures they may create. So there is usually not audits for changes that administrators make, so it's hard to hold someone accountable when things go wrong. Fourth on the list is you should absolutely not have any unsecure protocols on your FTP server. However, even if encryption is used, you should know that encryption methods can vary greatly in strength based on things like the key size and the type of encryption cipher used. Many of the older ciphers and protocols have been broken, which has made them obsolete and should not be used on your FTP server. Coming up in a couple slides, we'll cover the recommended protocols and ciphers we believe you should enable. Some of the free or older commercial FTP servers can be very difficult to administer, and some just have a command line interface that requires a lot of training and is susceptible to human error. Creating trading partners can be difficult in some systems, which may require the creation of OS-level user accounts or profiles for each trading partner. And setting up any keys or certificates or other configurations may also require cryptic command line tools and multi-step processes that can eat up valuable time. And then finally, one of the biggest complaints we hear from organizations is that their legacy FTP server does not have the alerts when things go wrong, such as the failed login or a potential attack. And they especially don't have the detailed audit trails they need to meet compliance requirements. The raw audit data may be written to a series of log files These logs can be difficult to query and analyze without the proper tools. For instance, can you quickly find out the errors that were encountered over a certain time frame? And can you quickly determine which files were downloaded from or to the FTP server over a given day or a week? Or can you just focus on a particular trading partner or an IP or even a file name? And these are some of the most common issues we've experienced or have heard from our customers when working with legacy FTP servers. So now on to our main topic. Over the next few slides, I want to share with you the top 10 tips we believe should be implemented on FTP servers to provide the best possible protection and to meet the latest compliance requirements. In each tip, we broke down into multiple to-do items, which will serve as a quick checklist for your FTP server. And I'll often reference sections of the PCI standards within each tip since they're very specific and are used throughout the world. So kind of starting off with FTP. If it's still running on your server, you should absolutely disable the FTP protocol. This protocol is over 30 years old and was not built to withstand the modern security threats we are facing today. Standard FTP offers no privacy. Everything that flows over FTP is in the clear, including the data, commands, user IDs, and passwords. And any hacker with access to the network or a router can easily capture your FTP packets using common sniffing tools like Wireshark. Standard FTP can also not guarantee the integrity of the data. An attacker can easily modify the contents of an FTP packet, and the receiving partner will have no idea that anything was changed. For instance, we heard of an attack a couple years ago where a hacker gained access to a router, was changing purchase orders for a customer that they were FTP into their vendor. Besides the problems created with those faulty orders, it cost the customer countless hours and thousands of dollars to finally track down the attack. And also with FTP, there's poor authentication. There's only one factor, just a user and a password. And many security experts are now recommending at least an additional factor of authentication be used, like a key or a certificate. And this is critical to establish trust between systems, especially when you're communicating over the public internet. So instead of using standard FTP, you should instead use either FTPS or SFTP protocols on your server. FTPS stands for FTP or SSL or TLS, and it creates a secure tunnel between your trading partner system and your server. And anything that flows over FTPS is encrypted, including your data, FTP commands, user IDs, and passwords. And FTPS has been around a long time and has proven to be a very secure protocol when configured properly. FTPS can also offer a two-factor authentication with SSL certificates, in addition to a user and a password. And the certificate can be signed by an authority like VeriSign to establish a chain of trust. In other words, if your certificate is signed by someone like VeriSign, your trading partner can be assured that your system can be trusted when they connect. The downfall of FTPS is that it does require a series of ports to be open in the firewall, since each data request, like a GET or a PUT, opens up a different data port in the system. If active FTPS mode is selected, multiple ports may need to be opened on your trading partner's firewall as well. And as you probably know, network administrators do not like to open up ports in firewalls, and for good reason, so that can be a big issue. And so a lot of organizations have moved away from FTPS for trading files over the internet and are just using it for communications between legacy internal systems like mainframes. Now SFTP, also called FTP or SSH, creates a secure tunnel between your trading partner system and your server. It protects all that traffic over the SFTP connection, and it's also proven to be a very solid protocol over the years. SFTP can additionally use an SSH public key to provide dual-factor authentication in combination with the user ID and the password. The main advantage of SFTP is it just uses a single port, which is port 22 by default, so your firewall administrator and your auditors will be more at ease since you're not having to open up multiple ports on that system. SFTP is built into Linux and Unix operating systems, and it's fairly easy to implement, which I believe has helped it become a much more popular protocol than FTPS over the last few years. Both SFTP and FTPS allow you to implement checksums or hashes to verify the integrity of data packets, which is a vital tenet of information security. In other words, the receiver can verify that the data is not modified in transit by either a faulty transmission or an intentional hack. In some cases, you may want to have both SFTP and FTPS enabled on your server if you have some trading partners that need one of those protocols or the other. And that's perfectly fine, but just remember FTPS does require those multiple ports, unless you use a DMZ gateway, which we'll talk about later on in the presentation. So let's talk about encryption and hashing. Encryption ciphers are used in both SFTP and FTPS protocols to protect the data that is transmitted. The cipher is a very complex algorithm that takes the data and along with the key, then produces the scrambled or encrypted data to transmit. When a connection is first made to the SFTP or FTPS server, the encryption ciphers to use is negotiated between the server and the client. If several ciphers are available, the server and the client should attempt to use the strongest cipher in their respective lists. Now you should be able to configure which encryption ciphers you want to support in your SFTP or FTPS server. And it's recommended to disable older encryption ciphers like Blowfish and DES in your system and only use strong encryption ciphers like AES or Triple DES. And if you had to choose between the two, you definitely want to choose the AES cipher because that's the latest and most secure cipher available. If the trading partner tries to connect to you with a weak cipher, then your SFTP or FTPS server should reject that connection. Now, hash or MAC algorithms are used to generate checksums of the data packets to verify the integrity of your data transmissions. So you should disable older hash algorithms like MD5 or SHA-1 and only use strong hash algorithms in the SHA-2 family like SHA-256 or SHA-512. All right, let's talk about the DMZ, which is the segment of the network where organizations have typically installed their FTP servers. The problem with the DMZ is since it faces the public internet, is the most vulnerable segment of the network for potential attacks. If the FTP server is in the DMZ, the trading partner's data files and user credentials are usually also stored in that network segment. So if an attacker gains access to the DMZ, they could potentially access those files and credentials, which is a big exposure. Increasingly, auditors and security professionals are strongly discouraging the storage of data files in the DMZ, even if those files are encrypted. You may have scripts in the private network that are scanning those folders in the DMZ and trying to move any new files into the private network as soon as possible. But those files are still vulnerable for that brief time they're staged there. Besides gaining access to the files and credentials in the DMZ, an attacker may be able to access the FTP server itself, and if they gain admin access, they could change security settings and maybe even set up their own FTP accounts for future attacks. They could also potentially remove any audit log entries to effectively cover their tracks in the DMZ. So some organizations have moved their FTP servers along with the associated data files and user credentials into the private network. And this has a lot of benefits, except that it would traditionally require that ports would have to be opened into the private network to accomplish this. And this could create a potential pathway for attacks into that private network. And since auditors and security professionals don't like to see any ports opened up, this has really created a big dilemma for organizations that want to host their own FTP server. So an approach that's really growing in popularity is to use what's called a DMZ gateway or an enhanced reverse proxy. The gateway is usually a software product that you would install onto, let's say, a Linux or Windows box in the DMZ. And a special control channel is then opened up from the private network to the DMZ at startup time. Now, since it's open in that direction, no inbound ports would be required into the private network area. The trading partners will connect to the gateway, and then the gateway will send that connection over that existing control channel to the FTP server in the private network. Again, no ports need to be opened for this to work. And this approach is completely transparent to the trading partner. They'll think they're connecting directly to your SFTP or FTPS server, but instead they're just connecting to the gateway to initiate that connection. So the gateway really solves two problems with hosting your own FTP server. It keeps those ports closed into the private network, and it will keep your data files and your user credentials safe within your private network. Next tip is number 4. You should strongly consider using IP blacklists and whitelists in your FTP server. A blacklist defines the range of IPs that are denied access to the system. For instance, you may want to blacklist IP addresses for certain countries that are notorious for hackers, like China or Russia, unless, of course, you got trading partners in those regions. Another approach is to have the FTP server perform auto blacklisting for certain types of attacks. So you could do auto blacklisting for a DOS attack, in which case they're trying to flood your FTP server with thousands of connection attempts over a short period of time. If your server detects this type of attack, it should blacklist the IP so it can no longer make those connections to that system. Of course, your firewall in front of the FTP server should help to prevent a DOS attack, but it's recommended to have the secondary level of monitoring to maintain availability for your legitimate trading partners. Your FTP server should also be able to auto blacklist an IP that's attempting multiple logins using different user IDs and passwords over a short period of time. And this auto blacklist feature should be configurable, since you don't want to blacklist a legitimate partner that's just had a couple of invalid login attempts. And finally, it's good to automatically blacklist an IP address that's trying to log in with a typical administrator user ID, like root or admin, because those are the first user IDs an attacker will typically attempt to use against your FTP server. Now, some FTP servers let you either temporarily or permanently ban an IP. If the IP is temporarily banned, then the user will have the opportunity to try to connect again in a few minutes, which may be good if a legitimate trading partner was having some issues on their end, such as a bad script. Now, if a whitelist is used, you may want to configure that to only allow certain trading partners to come in from certain IP addresses. And while this certainly adds an additional layer of security, it can become a maintenance headache if their IP addresses are changing frequently. And of course, IP addresses can be spoofed by attackers, so blacklisting and whitelisting are not foolproof, but it will certainly provide more protection for your FTP server environment. So let's talk about FTPS. If you are using an FTPS server, there are several security measures you should implement as listed below. In explicit mode, an FTPS server may allow an FTP client to connect to port 21 and explicitly choose if it wants an encrypted channel or not. To solve this security exposure, you should either shut down port 21 on your server or configure it to force FTP clients to use encryption for both the authentication and data channels. All other non-secure connections should be rejected. What is becoming more popular today is to only support implicit mode at port 990 for the FTPS server, in which case any FTP clients are forced into secure connection. And this is a good approach to ensure all channels are encrypted. Now, FTPS can use either SSL or TLS protocols to encrypt the communications. SSL, or Secure Sockets Layer, is an older protocol that should no longer be used since it's been broken with several different types of attacks. A TLS, or Transport Layer security, replaced SSL several years ago. However, it is not recommended to use TLS version 1.0 since it can be vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks. Therefore, you should only enable TLS versions 1.1 or 1.2 in your FTPS server. If a trading partner attempts to connect with any SSL version or TLS version 1.0, your FTPS server should reject that connection. And older key exchange algorithms should also be disabled. You should only use the modern elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman algorithm for exchanging any keys with your trading partners. And finally, since FTPS uses certificates for authentication, it's recommended to create those certificates with strong key links of either 2048 or 4096 bits. The longer the key, the stronger its protection. Also use the SHA-2 signature algorithms, which can be anywhere from 224 to 512 bits. Additionally, expired certificates should be removed from your FTPS server so they're not inadvertently used. And a good FTPS server should automatically notify you when a certificate's about to expire. That way you won't get a bunch of phone calls from your trading partners if you forgot to rotate in a new certificate in time. All right, I'm going to do another poll here. Let's see if I can do it right this time. And so I got let's get into the right place here. So I'm curious what kind of FTP servers you have within your environment. And so if you wouldn't mind taking a few seconds to respond to the poll here, and we'll publish those. Again, we're just going to publish a summary of the responses. And we'll just give you a couple more seconds. All right, very good. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll, and I'm going to share that with the group. And so it looks like 40% of the respondents are using an SFTP server, which is great. About 27% are using FTPS, and another fourth are using both the SFTP and FTPS server. And then it looks like we got about 20% that still are not using any kind of secure FTP server at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that. Now, Steve, I'm going to ask you if you've had any questions coming in from the group during my speech so far throughout the slides.
Sure. We did get one on that last slide when you're talking about TLS and SSL and that type of information, asking in regards to HTTPS because they also do HTTPS file transfers. And so a lot of the recommendations that Bob's giving during the webinar also apply to HTTPS and any SSL. So those are good recommendations. One other one here that'd be good to address to the group is somebody's looking to migrate away from their SFTP server. It's like one of the native servers on Linux. And they're asking about service level accounts because I guess they got like 1,000 accounts on there and they're trying to migrate systems and they just started researching it. They're asking, what do we recommend for it? Well, one of the things to consider would be your passwords on the Linux system because those are going to be stored into a Linux shadow password file. Look for a solution if you could, like GoAnywhere supports this. Basically, you can import users using the shadow password file on Linux into the new system. So that way your trading partner accounts don't have to reset their password. It minimizes disruption if you're trying to migrate systems.
Great, great. Those are great answers there, Steve. Thanks for that.
Yep.
All right, let's just move on. Tip number 6. So I'd like to talk about account management. So it's critical to have good account management practices for the security of your SFTP or FTPS server. And many of the free FTP servers require that you create a user account on the operating system for each trading partner. And this practice is highly discouraged because if you don't lock those OS user accounts down properly, it could create an opportunity for an attacker to gain access to other resources on that server's operating system. Instead, you should keep those user credentials for your trading partners in a secure database or an Active Directory domain or an LDAP server. And by storing those user credentials separately from the FTP server, it will make it much harder for an attacker to gain access to that highly sensitive information. And you should try to use a template-driven approach when creating your trading partner user accounts. This will help to guarantee that all user accounts are created consistently with the same security settings and permissions. A template can also automatically create any needed folders for the trading partner. Templates can really save time, especially if you have to add a lot of trading partners since you don't have to remember all the settings to turn on or off each time. And this is a simple one. You definitely want to require that a valid user ID is specified to log into the system. So you should disable anonymous users. And we're very surprised that there's still lots and lots of FTP servers that do allow for anonymous access. In fact, there's a study done recently where they discovered over 1 million FTP servers that still allow logging into the server without a user and password, which is a huge security exposure. Account username should be at least 7 characters in length, and each trading partner should have their own unique user ID. They should not share user IDs on the system. This will ensure accountability, so if there is an issue, you can track those logs back to a particular trading partner. Now, according to the PCI requirements, you should automatically disable user accounts if they've had 6 failed login attempts. So And additionally, you should disable any inactive accounts if they have not been used for 90 days of inactivity. There's a few things listed here that a smart auditor will look for when determining if your FTP server is in compliance. And a popular approach to streamline the provisioning of user accounts is to provide a web portal for your partners to self-register. After the partner verifies their email address, you can let that partner specify their own user ID and password that they would like to create on the system, as long as they comply with your user and password strengths and policies. And then if you're an administrator, an email can be sent to you with a request to either approve or deny the new account. Once you approve their account, the FTP server can automatically create that account and file folders with using predefined templates. Again, this self-service option is really getting popular since it streamlines user provisioning and reduces potential human error. All right, let's talk about passwords. So having a good password policy is critical to your SFTP or FTPS server security. To comply with PCI, your password should be at least 7 characters in length. However, some security experts are now recommending at least 10-character passwords to offer the best protection. The password should contain both numeric and alphanumeric characters. I also recommend that the password uses a combination of upper and lowercase characters, as well as at least one special character. And here's an example of a good password versus a bad password listed above it. You should be able to define a password policy within your FTP server, and it should enforce that policy no matter if you're creating that password yourself as an administrator or if your partner is self-registering. In other words, your FTP server should not allow you to create a weak password on the system. To comply with the PCI requirements, you should change admin passwords at least every 90 days, and you should also consider changing trading partner passwords on a regular basis. And the last 4 passwords should not be able to be reused by the user. And if the FTP server is storing those passwords in a database, make sure they're stored using a one-way hash algorithm like SHA-2 so they can't be decrypted by an attacker. Let's talk about file and folder security. It's important to only grant access to those particular folders or files that the trading partner needs access to. If the partner, for instance, if they only need access to be able to download files from a folder, then they should not have write authority to that folder. In turn, they should not have read access to a folder that they may only need to upload into. And so you should do your own internal audit of your current trading partners and make sure those folder permissions are set properly. Generally, trading partners should have their own unique folders so they do not see or accidentally overwrite other partners' files. But if there is a need to share folders between partners, you should make sure you got good granular permissions in place so those partners can only do those things that you need them to do within that system. You should also consider automatically encrypting the files at rest or on disk when they're uploaded by your trading partners, especially if you decide to store those files in the DMZ. But as I mentioned earlier, some auditors don't even like to see the files in the DMZ even if they are encrypted. Files should only be retained in the FTP server as long as they're needed, in which case they should be removed or archived to a secure location. By not having older files laying around, it just keeps things clean and gives you less things to worry about securing. And then finally, if a trading partner is allowed to upload files, you should be able to set a disk quota for that trading partner so they don't accidentally upload multiple gigabytes of data and crash your server. All right, let's talk about administration for tip number 9. Administration of your SFTP or FTPS server should be tightly controlled to prevent unauthorized access. Instead of storing passwords in the FTP server, you should store those credentials for your administrators in an Active Directory domain or LDAP server. When the administrator attempts to log into the FTP server, it will pass those credentials onto the AD or LDAP server for authentication. This approach provides nice separation of the credentials from the FTP server, which will slow down a would-be hacker. But also makes it easier for admin user since they don't have to maintain or remember yet another password for the FTP server. Now, for remote administration, that should only be allowed to your FTP server through an encrypted tunnel like a VPN. And the latest PCI standards require that an administrator uses two factors of authentication, which could be something like a password and a one-time token to log in. Other forms of authentication could be biometric, such as a thumb scan. As I mentioned on an earlier slide, you should not use common admin user IDs like root or admin on your FTP server, because those are some of the first user IDs an attacker will attempt to use when they try to get into your system. Separation of duties is also very important for your security program. Too many administrators may have elevated rights, meaning that they have more access than they really need for their job. For instance, some administrators may just need to be able to look at the FTP audit logs, but really don't need to be able to be, maintaining trading partner accounts or configuring security settings. So the FTP software should allow you to just assign certain needed roles to those administrators. And then also you need to make sure to disable any admin accounts that are no longer needed. If they were terminated or was reassigned to a different department, then you should take their admin account off the system immediately. Then number 10, I just kind of put together a list of miscellaneous best practices that we felt as a team you should implement to give your server the best security. As I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest problems with FTP servers today is they're not being kept up to date to meet the latest vulnerabilities. And since FTP servers are one of the primary attacks targets, this is one of those critical systems you don't want to fall out of date. When a security patch is made available by your vendor, you should really apply that patch at least within 30 days of its release. Now, if you work with the U.S. government, then they do require that any confidential information is protected using only improved encryption algorithms. And this requirement is outlined in a publication named FIPS 140-2. To meet the requirements of 142, the encryption algorithm should be tested and validated through an approved testing lab. And even if you don't work with data from the U.S. government, it is reassuring to an auditor if your FTP server is using encryption algorithms that were validated by an independent lab. And here's a few more tidbits listed here. For SFTP servers, it can show its version when a user first connects, which may also contain the brand name of that server's software. A would-be attacker could use that information to research potential vulnerabilities with that server. So instead of giving a would-be attacker any clues as to the brand or the version of your SFTP server, you should remove that information and change it to some obscure value. Also, if your FTP server has a backend database to store user IDs and other configurations, it's recommended to keep that database on a different system to make it more difficult for an attacker to gain access to that information. A separate database will also be useful if you need to decide to cluster your FTP servers, which we'll discuss in an upcoming slide. The PCI standards do require that any sessions that's been idle for 15 minutes need to re-authenticate with the server, which I think is a great idea. And this will prevent hijacking of those sessions. And you will need to use good key management tools if you work with SSH keys or certificates. A lot of key management tools, though, in the past have been command line based and difficult to use. And as you add more trading partners, it's going to become pretty evident that you'll need a good tool to work with all those different keys and certificates on your system. You should be able to assign those keys and certificates to your trading partners easily. And since this is a security feature, you should limit authority to the key management tool to a very small set of administrators. And finally, you should periodically run vulnerability scans and penetration tests against your FTP server to catch any security exposures before the hackers can find them. All right, so there's a few other considerations. I did promise 10 tips, which we've delivered in detail, but I want to give you a couple more items to think about that you could implement to make your SFTP or FTPS server even more effective. So one of the biggest problems that customers have told us is that their legacy FTP server is not letting them know when problems occur. So it should immediately notify you of any potential security issues or when any kinds of errors arise. And these alerts can be sent through like an email or a text message or a central monitoring system like a syslog server. And listed here are some good examples of when you should receive an immediate alert. For instance, you should probably know as soon as a trading partner account was disabled, maybe they had a certain number of invalid login attempts, so you can investigate it and help them fix their issue. Because you don't want their file transfers held up, especially if there are certain SLAs that must be met. And you should get an email or text for things like DOS or brute force attacks, or if there's an error with the upload or download of a file, or if maybe there's a potential virus in the software. And those are really important alerts to receive so you know exactly what's going on within your system. Here's an example of an alert here. So you should definitely know the user account that's affected, their IP address they're trying to log in from, the date and timestamp, and then the reason for that error or potential security issue. And of course, auditing is so critical for compliance requirements. That's one of the first things the auditor is going to ask for is your audit logs. So you need to make sure that your SFTP or FTPS server is logging all activity on the system. So it should track every event from the time the user logs into the system to the time they log out. And at a minimum, it should log like the date and timestamp of the event, the user ID, their IP, the command issued, the file information, and so on. And here's an example of the types of information that you probably would want to log in your SFTP or FTPS server to get compliant. Most modern FTP servers store those audit logs in a database system, so it should be easy to query and generate reports on. For instance, you should be able to quickly find the audit logs for a given user or a certain IP or a file name, all within a certain date or time range. We recommend that you keep your audit logs around for at least 1 year. However, it's really based on the regulations that you have to comply with. For instance, with Sarbanes-Oxley, the audit data has to be retained for at least 7 years, which is quite a long time. And you should be able to set a audit log retention policy in your FTP server. So it should automatically purge and archive any of the audit records when it hits those retention periods so they don't consume a large amount of disk space on your system. And modern FTP servers should also audit any admin activity on the server. For instance, you should know when any security settings were changed or any configuration changes were made by any administrator. And it should also log when trading partner accounts are being created, changed, or removed by those administrators. So having good audit logs, even of your admin activity, is really becoming critical for meeting those compliance requirements. Now, some organizations have multiple FTP servers scattered throughout their enterprise, and a likely reason is that each group, like a division or department, want to control over their FTP server and their trading partners. And maybe they're just afraid that another group might mess things up in their FTP server if they were granted access. Unfortunately, each FTP server probably has its own different set of administrators, different security settings and configurations, depending on who set them up. And this can really lead to inconsistencies and potential vulnerabilities on those FTP servers if they're misconfigured. If that's the case for your organization, then you should strongly consider consolidating those systems. To do this, some commercial solutions do provide the concept of what's called domains, in which case you can take a single FTP server and break it into what's called like security zones. And each domain could have its own set of sub-administrators whom are responsible for maintaining their subset of trading partners and their corresponding folders and files. They could just have a very small group of super administrators on top of that established overall security settings and configurations. And that would be a lot less burden on your IT staff by having less FTP servers to maintain and keep up to date. So domains are really proven to be the best of both worlds by letting you do that consolidation of your servers while still allowing each group to maintain their own specific business needs. And that will really simplify the administration and security of those FTP servers, as well as compliance audits, since you don't have to have your auditors looking at so many different systems. I also want to talk about clustering a little bit. If your FTP servers are mission critical for your organization, then you should consider using clustering to provide high availability. With clustering, you essentially have 2 or more FTP servers working in parallel. If you look at my example here, we have FTP Server 1 here and FTP Server 2 down below. and they're both working in conjunction with each other. They're using the same exact configurations and security settings because they're working off a shared database and file system that stores those configurations and settings. And then what you can do is you can front end that cluster with a load balancer so it can distribute those workloads from your trading partners between two or more systems. So it's not only going to provide you with high availability, but also load balancing as you add more volumes to your FTP services. And another benefit of clustering is you can shut down one of the installations for patching or maintenance without taking all your FTP services online. So clustering is getting more and more popular, especially for those customers that are running mission-critical environments. So here's a list of the kind of a summary of the tips we covered today. And let's bring up one last poll, because I am curious what's the biggest challenge with your SFTP or FTP server. And so if you don't mind taking a few seconds to answer those questions. And again, your identity will not be published, and then we'll publish those results to the audience. And so please respond if you're able. And Steve, while they're working on that, what other questions have you seen coming in?
Yeah, sure. This one was actually raised a couple slides ago when you're talking about some password stuff. They're talking about SFTP and FTP and the password requirements because they have to do multi-factor authentication, but it's tough to manage their passwords through FTP, and there is just a lot of manual intervention. They're asking for a recommendation, which is a lot of times solutions like GoAnywhere or others will have a web-based portal for your trading partners to kind of self-service. They can go in there and reset their own passwords. They can, usually a lot of systems like GoAnywhere, they'll send you an email to say, hey, your password's going to expire in so many days, and then let them reset it. So that'll kind of take away a lot of that burden from managing people's passwords for FTP and FTPS and SFTP.
Okay, awesome. So, okay, great. Yep. All right, thanks, Steve. And I did just publish the poll so you can see what the respondents were. It looks like number one on the list is kind of tight. It's difficult to administer and lacking good alerts and audit trails. And that's a very common complaint that we get from customers that are running legacy FTP servers. Maybe they're using an FTP server that was built into the operating system, or some free FTP server that they downloaded many years ago, and it's just really kind of fallen out of date. It also looks like security is a big concern. It's not as secure as they'd like it to be. So thanks for responding to that. So let me hide that. Now, I noticed that some of the attendees were already customers of our GoAnywhere managed file transfer solution. And for those customers, hopefully you got some good tips on how to configure the GoAnywhere SFTP and FTPS server modules to be as secure as possible. However, if you are currently not a GoAnywhere customer, then I encourage you to take a look at the next couple slides to learn more about the solution. GoAnywhere can address all the compliance and security requirements that we've been talking about for your secure FTP services, but also offers workflow abilities to automate the movement of files within your network and with your trading partners. And here's just a quick diagram that shows you a top-down view of its capabilities. GoAnywhere can be installed into most operating systems, including Windows, Linux, IBM i. It can run in a VMware environment. We also have customers now putting it to Amazon or Azure cloud services. GoAnywhere can be managed right through the nice browser interface. And that's going to let you configure all the different services you'd like to enable in the product. Now, we've talked a lot about inbound type services like FTPS and SFTP servers, and so that can be configured and administered through the interface. And you can also enable our HTTPS interface in the product, where customers can come in through an ad hoc basis and upload and download files without having any software on their side required. We also have secure forms where they can come in and fill out custom forms that you can pre-build for them, where you could prompt them for certain attributes or parameters before they upload the file. And then you can choose, based on that information they've entered, how to route that information throughout your organization. So GoAnywhere also lets you connect out to your trading partners. So we support FTP and secure FTP protocols. So GoAnywhere can act as a client to initiate connections and push and pull files on an automated basis. They can connect up to not only your FTP systems and secure FTP systems, but they can orchestrate file movement within your networks. It can connect out to websites, back-end database systems, back-end applications, as well as email servers to push and pull files on an automated fashion. It has a built-in scheduler. It can also monitor folders on your FTP and file systems to automatically grab files and operate on those files as they arise. Now, GoAnywhere can send out alerts if there's any problems that occur, such as a failed login, or perhaps it's having issues connecting to the server. Now, GoAnywhere does have a built-in auto retry, so it can automatically retry a connection for a period of time if there's a problem. But if it continues to have issues, you can immediately have it send out an alert via like an email or text or through a syslog feed of that issue. And then it will audit all activity, no matter if it's inbound coming into your SFTP or FTPS servers, or if it's outbound where you're connecting out to their servers to push and pull files via batch or ad hoc. That's all getting logged into a central database that you can quickly drill down into that audit information through our browser interface. Or we also have a lot of different management reports that you can generate in PDF format to show statistics and analytics on what's going on within the system. So I just wanted to share that with you briefly. If you was to download the slides for today's presentation, it does have a few more slides on GoAnywhere that you can take a look at. GoAnywhere is available for a free 30-day trial. You can download it, try it within your own environment, and make sure it meets your needs before you decide to make a decision. Just to give you a little more information here is our main website, GoAnywhere.com. If you'd like to learn more about our secure FTP server. Other than that, Steve, do you see any remaining questions coming through?
Not really remaining questions. We got some compliments. I mean, it sounds like a lot of good information. Nothing outstanding. Otherwise, I've been able to address all of them individually.